What's up, everybody? Within the revered halls of the Church of Rome, there appears to be an abnormally high number of Pontifex Maximus collaborating with some sort of jinn. Here we have St. Augustine being depicted as receiving the Book of Vices from a jinn. Boniface VIII is rumored to be in league with the Prince of Darkness. Benedict the Ninth, who threw wild naked parties with males and females of all ages, sometimes even inviting the livestock, was described as being a demon from hell in the disguise of a priest. Sylvester II is said to have been able to have the jinn do certain tasks for him. One of them was fortune telling. Here's Leo X being played like a bagpipe, and the list goes on. So what's going on here? Is this all just old school smear campaigns? Or were they really in league with diabolical spirits? Nowadays, we're used to seeing the Pope as this friendly old grandfatherly type who couldn't possibly be a threat to anyone, and that's by design. But things haven't always been that way. You see these 3 cages hanging on the tower here? Well, those have been on the front of the cathedral since the 1536 Munster Rebellion, where a group of radical Anabaptists tried to establish a communal sectarian government in the city of Munster. So they were trying to deny the Church of Rome's secular governmental powers. They failed, and the people of that city have had an ever-present reminder of what happens to rebels around here. That's just one example of how politics used to work, and it's pretty much the real-life Game of Thrones. So accusing a rival of being in league with the jinn wouldn't surprise me at all, and I'm pretty sure that's exactly what some of these stories are. But I'm not sure that that's what all of them are. So what if some of these stories are true? Well, I have questioned how Yahweh in the OT is night and day different than the message that Jesus taught and the Father that he spoke of. Of course, churchianity has an explanation to reconcile these differences called dispensationalism, where history is divided into distinct ages or dispensations where God interacts with humanity in unique ways. So in the OT, God didn't want the Egyptians to see the errors of their ways and come to the light, as is seen in the New Testament. He wanted Pharaoh to deny him. He hardened his heart so he could inflict maximum punishment to prove his power. Then when they left Egypt, they genocided everyone and their livestock that was in their path. And there never was a single plea to recognize Yahweh as the one true God, which is black and white difference between that and what Jesus taught. So I've had my suspicions about who the OT God really is, which then led me to question, who was it that definitively said that Yahweh is the Father that Jesus was talking about and slapped OT right on the front of the New Testament? Other early church leaders like Marcion recognized that there's no way that these can be the same God, then was labeled as a heretic, and I think this was a little early to be excommunicated, but shunned from the true church. So who was it that decided what the true church believes? Well, I'm not going to get into the specifics, Eusebius and the other heretical lawyers, whatever they called them. I am going to point this out, though. At the time of Jesus, there was already many different priestly classes that were in the business of running temples. And let me tell you, business was good. That's why the ancient temples are the most opulent structures around. When everybody in town gives you 10% of their earnings for you to understand the will of the gods, then the priests wind up with the nicest house on the block, robes of the finest fabric, and everybody in town understands the gods like their steaks medium well. Should some guy named Jesus come along and say that, well, that's not exactly what God wants, and that idea is on fire like the latest TikTok trend, well then, to protect their own self-interest, the priests may co-opt that narrative and make sure the people understand that, well, you have to interpret this the right way. So keeping up with the times, they converted all of the old pagan temples into churches. And a message of brotherly love doesn't do much if your goal is to conquer the infidels up the road and take all their pretty little things too. But Yahweh, he really liked that kind of thing. So let's just tell everybody that Yahweh is the Father of Jesus. And yes, Jesus spoke of brotherly love among you peons. But in the higher orders of the church, We must safeguard the flock with an iron rod as Yahweh has prescribed. So that's just kind of how I see things behind my eyes. Don't get me wrong, I'm sure there were a lot of devout, pious men like the martyrs that just wanted to spread the good word. But just like today in our government, there are a lot of good men and women in there, but they're not the ones calling the shots. And the people calling the shots here decided that Yahweh definitely should have a position of prominence in this church. So back to this idea. What if it's not just a 1 off or 2 off or 10 off that the Popa is said to consort with jinn? What if that was the point and they knew this from the beginning? We have this idea cropping up in the Middle Ages, but let's rewind allegedly 2,000 years, and we have King Solomon, who is said to have had a magical ring that controlled the jinn. The temple was built by jinn. He could communicate with animals. He had a flying carpet. He made the Queen of Sheba's throne room appear in a matter of seconds from hundreds or thousands of miles away. And it's just strange that the holiest, most revered man of the OT is known outside of the OT as the father of jinn magic. And what if the holy fathers of our era are just carrying on an ages-old tradition? Is it possible that they have Solomon's ring and they can control the jinn? Well, that would at least be more consistent than Yahweh and Jesus. According to the Testament of Solomon, behold, when the temple of the city of Jerusalem was being built, and the artificers were working thereat, Orneus the demon came among them towards sunset, and he took away half the pay of the chief deviser's little boy, as well as half his food. He also continued to suck the thumb of his right hand every day, make what you will of that, and the child grew thin, although he was very much loved by the king. So King Solomon called the boy one day and questioned him, saying, "Do I not love thee more than all the artisans who are working at the temple? Do I not give thee double wages and double supply of food? How is it that day by day and hour by hour thou growest thinner?" But the child said to the king, "I pray thee, O king, listen to what has befallen all that thy child hath. After we are all released from our work on the temple, after sunset, when I lie down to rest, one of the evil jinn comes and takes away from me 1/2 of my pay and 1/2 of my food." Well, wouldn't that just be normal rations then? Anyway, then he also takes hold of my right hand and sucks my thumb. And lo, my soul is oppressed, and so my body waxes thinner every day. Now, when I, Solomon, heard this, I entered the temple of God and prayed with all my soul, night and day, that the jinn might be delivered into my hands, and that I might gain authority over him. And it came about through my prayer that grace was given to me from the Lord by Michael, his archangel. He brought me a little ring, having a seal consisting of an engraved stone, and said to me, "Take, O Solomon king, son of David, the gift which the Lord has sent thee, the highest Sabaoth. With it thou shalt lock up all jinn of the earth, male and female, and with their help thou shalt build up Jerusalem. But thou must wear the seal of God." When you really break this story down, that's an important bit right there, because then I, Solomon, was overjoyed and praised and glorified the God of heaven and earth. And on the morrow I called the boy and gave him the ring and said to him, "Take this, and at the hour in which the jinn shall come unto thee, throw this ring at the chest of the jinn, and say to him, in the name of God, King Solomon calls thee hither." Okay, I'm going to shorten this up some. Orneus shows up, the kid throws the ring at him, it somehow binds him, and he tries to bargain with the child and says, "Hey, if you take this off of me, I'll show you where the gold of the earth is." And that's mentioned several times throughout the narrative. I'll show you where the gold, silver, and precious gems are. So it would appear that King Solomon's wealth was given to him through the jinn. Solomon starts questioning Orneus and says, "Tell me, O jinn, to what zodiacal sign thou art subject?" So there's some connection between the stars in the heavens and jinn and even angels. Orneus even says that he is the offspring of the archangel Uriel, which makes me think of a couple things. One is the sons of God came into the daughters of men and took them as wives. Then their offspring were the Nephilim. And some would say that the jinn are the spirits of the Nephilim trapped here on earth. And then I think about it in the Gnostic sense, where Sophia had a child without the help of her male counterbalance self. And due to that imbalance, the child was an abomination, Yaldabaoth, who is the god of this world. So when gods and angels have offspring, you never know what you're going to get, apparently. So then Ornia starts summoning other jinn and helps King Solomon trap them. And as each one of them are captured, he puts them to work on the temple, which I've always thought was weird. It's the holiest site in all of Yahwehdianism, and it was built by the jinn. Now, remember how Solomon was instructed to always wear the ring for protection? Well, the first thing he does is give it to a kid to go trap the jinn. And something I've always thought about people who want to summon them or bind them to do thy bidding is that a man may be pretty smart, have a few tricks up his sleeve, but a jinn that's been around for thousands of years probably knows a lot more than any of us. So while you think that you're playing them, they're actually playing you. Among the many clever schemes devised by the jinn, one tale stands out. It is said that Solomon had a special practice when he entered a sacred place. He would remove his ring and entrust it to one of his wives, for the ring bore the most glorious name of God, and Solomon wished to avoid bringing it into such a space. Now, doesn't that seem weird? If a space is sacred because it's one of God's places, then why would you not want to carry the name of God into one of those places? But Solomon would remove the ring, give it to one of his wives. Upon exiting, he would call for his servants and then retrieve the ring. However, one of the rebel jinn who had once submitted to Solomon's authority devised a cunning plan. One day, this jinn took on Solomon's likeness and waited for him to enter the sacred place. As Solomon secluded himself, the jinn emerged in his guise, following the same ritual Solomon did each time. Approaching the wife entrusted with the ring, he asked for it, as was customary. Seeing who she believed to be her husband, she handed it over without hesitation. The demon placed the ring on his finger and seated himself on Solomon's throne. No one doubted him for a moment. The birds, beasts, and people all obeyed him, for they too believed he was Solomon. When the real Solomon completed his prayers and asked for the ring, his wife responded, confused, that she had already given it to him. It was then that Solomon realized what had happened. Rushing to his throne room, he saw the demon seated in his place. Horrified, Solomon fled to the wilderness, where he wandered for 40 days, or as some say, 4 months, until God, in his mercy, restored the ring to him, allowing him to reclaim his throne. There's some variations to that story. According to the Talmud, Asmodeus is known for tricking Solomon into gaining his ring of power that he then cast into the sea, where it was swallowed by a fish. This allowed the legions of jinn under King Solomon's power to rise up against the king. Asmodeus then cast the king 400 miles outside Jerusalem. Solomon lived as a beggar, wandering from city to city, working in kitchens and doing hard labor. Ancient rabbis claim that this was a divine punishment by God for Solomon worshiping foreign deities. Years later, he was walking in a market and bought a fish for his supper, the same fish that held the magic ring in his belly. King Solomon then returns to Jerusalem to expel Asmodeus and his demonic rule. Asmodeus is said to be thwarted by the archangel Raphael, who binds him. I've also heard that Asmodeus has everybody fooled, and then he wants to lay with his mother, and his mother realizes it's not the real Solomon. But yeah, every account outside of the Bible ties Solomon with the jinn. According to the history of the non-Arab peoples, name I can't pronounce, Solomon had decided to wed Bilqis, which is Queen of Sheba, but the jinn were uneasy. They feared that if Bilqis, whose father was a king of the jinn, became Solomon's wife, she might reveal their secrets to him. Concerned, they devised a plan to dissuade Solomon from the marriage. And then there's a big long story I'm not going to get into. But according to that, the Queen of Sheba was the daughter of the king of the jinn. Now, in the Testament of Solomon, one of the jinn that he captures has control over the winds. But then the Quran states that Allah gave Solomon command over the winds, by which he was able to travel a 2-month journey in less than a day, referring to Solomon and his magic carpet. Then there's a couple verses from the Quran here, and I don't know why, but they have the word we capitalized, which is making me think in terms of the Elohim making man in our image. But it says, and we subjected to Solomon the violent wind. It blew at his bidding toward the land which we had blessed, and we have knowledge of all things. I don't know much about the Quran, but this is definitely curious how they keep using the term we. Another verse says, and to Solomon we subjected the wind. Its morning course was a month's journey, and its evening course was a month's journey too. And we caused a fount of molten copper to flow for him. And of the jinn were some who worked under him by the command of his Lord, and we said that whoever of them turned away from our command, we would make him taste the punishment of the burning fire. So that's definitely curious how they're speaking in the first person plural. Any of you guys know what that's about? Now, as far as the flying carpet goes, all these images are just showing a regular sized carpet, but some of the legends say that him and his whole court would fly on this thing. There's even legends from Tibet about this. But once again, in the Muslim tradition, he had a mat made of wood on which he would place all the equipment of his kingship, horses, camels, tents, and troops. Then he would command the winds to carry it, and he would go underneath, and it would carry him aloft, shading him and protecting him from the heat until it reached wherever he wanted to go in the land. Then it would come down and deposit his equipment and entourage. So when they describe it as carrying companies of men and all their horses and all their gear, it sounds more like technology than jinn magic, which may be the same thing. When you look at the sigils of all of the different jinn, they almost look like little circuit breaker or something, circuit boards. And you know, how did we even get these? I mean, did somebody thousands of years ago sit down and make this up like a Pokemon game? Or does this direct the energy of starlight into another realm? This one is also said to be the seal of Solomon, different than the pentagram thing from the ring. And I'm pretty sure that these two symbols right here are symbols of planets. I couldn't tell you which ones. But once again, it's implying that the planets have some type of power over things here. And that's kind of ubiquitous with ancient philosophies. It's the heavens rule over us, just like clockwork. And when you get into like Zohar philosophy of things, everything in this world is an emanation of the divine being. But these emanations kind of filter down through the galaxy to get to us. And the way the jinn operate is they will intercept those messages sometimes and change things. Anyway, everything to do with Solomon seems to stem from jinn magic. Here you see Solomon with 2 horns. And then in several different depictions here, you have Solomon, a jinn, and then this guy over here with horns. Then you have a bunch of jinn, Solomon, and here's that guy with the horns again. And then one more time. I'm guessing he's some type of high priest. High priest of what? I don't know, but he's always there. It's King Solomon's hype man. But from what I can tell, the root of all magic comes from Solomon. So now let's jump forward to the Church of Rome era. If you look up what happened to Solomon's ring, it just gives you the same story that I told you a minute ago about Asmodeus threw it in the sea, it was swallowed by a fish, and then it magically returned to Solomon. A lot like Lord of the Rings. I'm sure that's the basis of that whole thing there. Remember how they were fishing and a fish drug him down to the bottom, didn't he? And he discovered it. Anyway, it's all based off of Solomon's Ring of Power. But what happened to it, apparently nobody knows, at least not in public archives. And, you know, you hear all kinds of rumors about what happened to the Ark of the Covenant, or Noah's Ark, the Spear of Destiny, the Holy Grail. These are all things that people have searched for throughout time, but there's not a peep on what happened to Solomon's ring. Could that be because they already know where it's at? You know, you don't usually go looking for things that aren't lost. If it's already down in the basement, you're probably not going to fund that expedition to go find it, are you? Just a thought. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I'll catch you on the next one. Static out.